For many years, the conflict between Israel and Iran was a hidden one, fought through spies, cyber attacks, and proxy groups in other countries. It was a dangerous game of moves and counter-moves played in the shadows, far from the public eye. Most people around the world were not directly aware of this long and tense struggle. The two nations never engaged in direct, open warfare. Instead, they used indirect methods to hurt each other, creating a constant but low-level state of hostility that simmered just beneath the surface of regional politics. This long-standing shadow war defined their relationship for decades, making them bitter enemies without a formal declaration of war. This all changed dramatically on Friday, June 13th, 2025. The unspoken rules that had governed their conflict for so long were suddenly broken. What had been a secret war, fought by intelligence agents and specialized military units, erupted into open and direct military confrontation. The world watched in shock as news reports confirmed that Israeli warplanes had carried out airstrikes deep inside Iranian territory. This was a major escalation, a move that crossed a red line that both sides had carefully avoided for years. The shadow war was over, and a new, much more dangerous phase of direct conflict had begun, bringing the entire Middle East to the brink of a much larger war. The shift was not entirely without warning. Tensions had been building for months. Diplomatic efforts to revive a nuclear deal between Iran and world powers had failed. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the world's nuclear watchdog, had formally condemned Iran for not being transparent about its nuclear activities. This censure, the first in 20 years, signaled a breakdown in trust and diplomacy. Israel, which has long seen a nuclear-armed Iran as a threat to its very existence, felt that time was running out. The diplomatic path seemed closed, and from Israel's perspective, military action was becoming the only option left to prevent what it feared most. The decision to strike was also influenced by a specific military opportunity. In late 2024, Israel had managed to damage a significant portion of Iran's advanced S-300 air defense systems. This created a temporary window of vulnerability, making it easier for Israeli jets to penetrate Iranian airspace and hit their targets with less risk of being shot down. With negotiations collapsing and this military advantage in hand, Israeli leaders made a fateful choice. The attack on June 13th was not just a single act of aggression. It was the culmination of years of rising tension, failed diplomacy, and strategic military planning, finally pushing the long-simmering conflict into direct and open flames for all the world to see. Israel named its military campaign Operation Rising Lion. It was a large-scale and complex series of airstrikes designed to achieve specific goals: to damage Iran's nuclear program, destroy its long-range missile capabilities, and weaken its military leadership. The operation involved dozens of advanced fighter jets, flying hundreds of miles across hostile territory to reach their targets. The initial waves of attacks were swift and powerful, aimed at surprising Iran and overwhelming its defenses before it could mount an effective response. The primary targets were facilities that Israel believed were crucial to Iran's ability to build a nuclear weapon and to threaten Israel from a distance. The strikes focused heavily on Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Bombs hit centrifuge production workshops at the Natanz nuclear facility, a key site for enriching uranium. While the main underground enrichment halls were reportedly not destroyed, the damage to the production areas was significant, aimed at slowing down Iran's ability to build more advanced centrifuges. The Shahid Meysami Group facility in Karaj, suspected of being involved in chemical weapons research, was also targeted. Another major focus was Iran's ballistic missile force. Israeli jets struck the Tehrani Moghadam missile base near Tehran and the Amand missile base in Tabriz, specifically hitting storage sites for Ghadar missiles, which have the range to reach Israel. The Israeli military has claimed significant success in its operation. According to their assessments, the strikes have destroyed approximately 50% of Iran's ballistic missile launchers, taking over 200 of them out of commission. They also claim to have destroyed between 35 and 45% of Iran's total missile stockpiles. These numbers suggest a major blow to Iran's offensive capabilities. Beyond the hardware, Israel also targeted military command centers and police headquarters in Tehran, aiming to disrupt the chain of command within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the powerful military force that controls the missile and nuclear programs. The goal was not just to break things, but to cripple Iran's ability to fight back effectively. This operation represents one of the most ambitious and risky military actions Israel has ever undertaken. Striking deep inside a country as large as Iran is a huge logistical and military challenge. It required precise intelligence, advanced aircraft, and the element of surprise. While Israel's air force is considered one of the best in the world, the success of the mission likely depended on the earlier degradation of Iran's air defenses. The strikes were designed to set back Iran's military programs by years. But in doing so, Israel also took a massive gamble, knowing that a powerful response from Iran was almost certain to follow, forever changing the nature of their conflict. Iran's response was swift and massive, codenamed Operation True Promise 3. Within hours of the Israeli strikes, Iran launched a barrage of weapons toward Israel. This was not a small symbolic counterattack. It was one of the largest missile and drone attacks the world has ever seen. Iran fired over 400 ballistic and cruise missiles and launched more than 1,000 drones in the initial waves of its retaliation. The skies over the Middle East lit up as these weapons traveled across countries like Iraq and Jordan on their way to Israel. The goal was clear: to overwhelm Israel's sophisticated air defense systems through sheer numbers and to show that Iran could and would strike back with devastating force. Despite the massive scale of the attack, Israel's multi-layered air defense system, which includes the famous Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow systems, proved to be incredibly effective. Working in coordination with allies like the United States, who helped shoot down incoming projectiles, Israel managed to intercept the vast majority of the threats. Out of the more than 1,400 missiles and drones fired in the first major barrage, Israeli officials reported that only about 40 managed to penetrate its airspace and hit targets on the ground. This high interception rate was a major defensive victory for Israel, but it could not prevent all damage and casualties. The missiles that did get through caused real damage and spread fear across Israel. One of the successful hits was on a military intelligence school in Tel Aviv, a significant blow to a military target. Other missiles landed in civilian areas, striking homes and infrastructure. Sirens blared across the country for days, forcing families to run for bomb shelters at a moment's notice. The constant threat of attack disrupted daily life completely. Although the initial massive wave of retaliation has subsided, Iran has continued to launch smaller barrages of 2 to 20 missiles at a time, suggesting that its capabilities may have been degraded but are not entirely gone. This direct missile exchange marked a historic and terrifying new reality. For the first time, Iran had launched a direct military assault on Israeli territory from its own soil. In the past, Iran relied on its proxy groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon or militias in Syria to attack Israel. This time, Iran took direct responsibility, crossing a major threshold in the conflict. The retaliation demonstrated Iran's willingness to risk all-out war and showed the world the destructive potential of its large missile arsenal, even if many were intercepted. The attacks turned the shadow war into a hot war, with both sides now openly trading heavy blows. The escalation from a shadow war to open conflict has had a devastating impact on the lives of ordinary people in both Iran and Israel. The statistics on casualties and damage only tell part of the story. Behind the numbers are families torn apart, communities living in fear, and daily lives shattered by violence. In Iran, the Israeli airstrikes have resulted in significant loss of life. Reports indicate that between 224 and 585 people have been killed, a number that includes both military personnel and civilians who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Over 1,277 more have been injured, overwhelming hospitals and medical services in the targeted areas. In Tehran and other cities hit by the strikes, a sense of panic has taken hold. Many residents have been trying to flee the capital, causing traffic jams on highways leading out of the city. Those who remain describe a city that feels deserted. The Iranian government has also severely restricted internet access, a move it says is necessary to prevent enemy threats, but one that also cuts people off from their families and the outside world, making it difficult to get reliable information. The fear of more strikes is constant, and the economic disruption caused by the conflict is making it even harder for people to cope with an already difficult situation. In Israel, the rain of Iranian missiles has brought the war home to civilians in a terrifying way. So far, 24 civilians have been killed in the attacks, a tragic toll that includes a young Ukrainian child who was in Israel receiving cancer treatment. The psychological impact is immense, with air raid sirens becoming a part of the daily soundtrack of life. Over 1,300 people have been displaced from their homes because of damage from missile strikes. The constant threat has also led to shortages of essential goods like food and fuel, as supply chains are disrupted and people rush to stock up on necessities, fearing a longer and more intense conflict. The human suffering extends beyond the immediate casualties and physical damage. The conflict has created a climate of constant anxiety and uncertainty. In Israel, an airlift was launched to bring home citizens who were stranded abroad when the conflict began and airports were closed. In Iran, foreign nationals, including many from China and Pakistan, have been seen fleeing the country by land, desperate to escape the violence. For people on both sides, the future is frighteningly uncertain. The war is not just being fought by soldiers and with advanced weapons. It is being felt deeply in the homes and hearts of millions of ordinary people who are now caught in the crossfire. The sudden escalation between Israel and Iran has put the United States in an extremely difficult and delicate position. As Israel's closest and most powerful ally, the United States has been deeply involved from the start. But its role is complicated. Before the strikes, the United States had been trying to find a diplomatic solution to the nuclear standoff, but those talks had stalled. While the US government provided intelligence and defensive support to help Israel intercept Iran's retaliatory missile barrage, it has not yet joined Israel's bombing campaign. This has left the world and America's own allies and enemies guessing about its next move. President Trump is facing immense pressure from all sides. He has publicly demanded Iran's unconditional surrender, but has also repeatedly stated, "Nobody knows what I'm going to do." This really reflects a deep conflict within his own administration and political base. On one hand, there is a strong push from some advisors and politicians to stand with Israel and use American military power to dismantle Iran's nuclear and military capabilities for good. On the other hand, President Trump has also promised to avoid getting the United States entangled in new, costly wars in the Middle East, a promise that resonates with many of his voters who are wary of foreign intervention. In response to the crisis, the United States has moved significant military assets into the region. The USS Nimitz, a massive aircraft carrier, has been deployed to the area, along with additional KC-46 tanker aircraft to support potential air operations. These moves serve as a powerful warning to Iran and a reassurance to allies, but they also increase the risk of the United States being drawn directly into the fighting. President Trump has held urgent meetings in the Situation Room with his top defense and national security officials, including Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who has confirmed that the Pentagon is ready to carry out any orders the president gives. The decision facing the American president is honestly one of the most consequential of his term. Joining the conflict could lead to a full-scale regional war with devastating consequences, not only for the Middle East, but for the global economy and US forces stationed in the region. Iran has warned that any American attack will have serious consequences and be met with retaliation against United States bases. However, staying out of the fight could be seen as abandoning a key ally at a critical moment and might allow Iran to recover and continue its path toward a nuclear weapon. The world is watching Washington, waiting to see which path America will choose. The direct war between Israel and Iran has sent shockwaves throughout the Middle East, forcing neighboring countries to navigate a treacherous new landscape. Publicly, most Arab nations, including key US partners like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, have condemned the Israeli strikes and called for de-escalation. They have to do this to manage public opinion at home, where there is often strong sympathy for the Palestinian cause and distrust of Israel. These official statements are designed to maintain stability and avoid being seen as siding with Israel against a fellow Muslim nation, even one they consider a rival. However, behind the scenes, the situation is much more complex. Privately, leaders in Saudi Arabia and the UAE have long viewed Iran's regional ambitions and its nuclear program as the single greatest threat to their security and stability. For years, they have been locked in their own proxy conflicts with Iran in places like Yemen and Syria. According to US lawmakers who have spoken with them, these Gulf Arab leaders are quietly relieved to see Iran's military and nuclear capabilities being degraded by the Israeli strikes. They would prefer to see Iran's power checked, but they are terrified of the conflict spilling over and engulfing the entire region in a massive war. Other regional powers have reacted differently. Turkey, a NATO member with complex relationships with both Israel and Iran, has harshly condemned Israel's actions, with its leadership accusing Israel of state terrorism. At the same time, Turkey has offered to mediate between the two sides, hoping to play a role as a regional peacekeeper and increase its own influence. Russia, another major player with forces in Syria, has also called for restraint and offered to help mediate a solution. Both Russia and Turkey are worried that a wider war could destabilize the region further and threaten their own strategic interests, particularly in Syria. The conflict has also put Iran's regional proxies in a difficult position. Groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthi rebels in Yemen, which are funded and armed by Iran, are reportedly in a weakened state. The Houthis have threatened to join the fight against Israel, but their capacity to do so is limited due to their own ongoing conflict in Yemen and their distance from Israel. Hezbollah, Iran's most powerful proxy, has so far remained relatively quiet, likely waiting to see how the direct conflict between its patron and its main enemy unfolds. The reactions across the region are a delicate mix of public condemnation, private relief, strategic calculation, and deep-seated fear of what might come next. At the very heart of this new, open conflict is Iran's nuclear program. For years, Israel and other world powers have feared that Iran is secretly trying to build a nuclear bomb, a charge that Iran has always denied, insisting its program is for peaceful energy purposes. Just before the fighting broke out, the situation reached a boiling point. The International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, formally found Iran to be non-compliant with its obligations for the first time in 2 decades. This was because Iran had failed to explain the discovery of uranium particles at several undeclared old sites, raising suspicions about its past activities. This diplomatic crisis was fueled by Iran's technical progress. By early June 2025, Iran had accumulated a large stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Reports confirmed it had amassed 409 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. This is a very high level, just a short technical step away from the 90% purity needed for a weapon. While US intelligence believed Iran had not yet made the political decision to build a bomb, military officials warned that it was now only weeks away from having enough material to do so if it chose to. This shrinking timeline created a sense of extreme urgency in Israel and was a key trigger for the military strikes. Israel's Operation Rising Lion was specifically designed to cripple this program. The airstrikes targeted key nuclear sites, most notably the centrifuge production facilities at Natanz. Centrifuges are the machines used to enrich uranium, and by destroying the workshops that build them, Israel aimed to slow down Iran's ability to produce weapons-grade material. While the strikes reportedly did not destroy the heavily fortified underground enrichment halls where the centrifuges operate, they damaged the critical infrastructure needed to expand and maintain the program. The IAEA has confirmed damage to the sites, but has also stated that thankfully, no dangerous radiation leaks have been detected. Despite the damage, Iran remains defiant. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has publicly stated that even if its nuclear facilities are destroyed, they will be rebuilt. In a direct response to the IAEA's condemnation and just before the strikes, Iran informed the agency that it was planning to open a third uranium enrichment plant, signaling its intention to accelerate its program, not abandon it. The conflict has now created a dangerous paradox. The Israeli strikes were meant to stop Iran's nuclear progress, but they could end up pushing Iran's leaders to decide that the only way to guarantee their nation's security is to build a nuclear weapon as quickly as possible. The world now holds its breath, watching to see what Israel and Iran will do next. The situation is incredibly volatile, and the next steps taken by either side could easily lead to a much larger and more destructive war. For Israel, the immediate challenge is assessing the true impact of its strikes and deciding if further action is needed. If its intelligence shows that Iran's nuclear and missile programs remain a significant threat, Israeli leaders might be tempted to launch another wave of attacks to try and finish the job. This would be a high-risk move that would almost certainly provoke another massive retaliation from Iran. For Iran, the choices are equally difficult. Its leadership is under immense pressure to show strength and avenge the Israeli attack. However, its military has been significantly damaged, and its initial massive retaliation did not cause the catastrophic damage it may have hoped for, due to Israel's strong defenses. Iran could choose to continue launching smaller missile attacks to keep the pressure on Israel. Another possibility is that it could unleash its proxy forces, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, to open a new front against Israel. This would dramatically widen the conflict, drawing in Lebanon and potentially other countries as well. The role of the United States is perhaps the most critical factor in determining what happens next. If the US decides to join Israel's military campaign, the conflict would transform into a full-scale war between the West and Iran. This would likely involve massive airstrikes on Iran and could trigger Iranian attacks on US military bases and ships throughout the Middle East, as well as on global oil supplies. On the other hand, if the US uses its influence to de-escalate the crisis and pushes for a ceasefire, it could create an opening for diplomacy to resume. The decision made in Washington will have enormous consequences. Beyond the main actors, the international community is scrambling to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. The United Nations Security Council is likely to hold emergency meetings, though it is often paralyzed by divisions between major powers like the US, Russia, and China. Other countries, like Turkey and Russia, have offered to mediate, but it is unclear if either Israel or Iran is ready to talk. The immediate future is fraught with peril. Any miscalculation, any mistaken intelligence, or any single attack that causes mass casualties could trigger a chain reaction that no one can control, plunging the entire region into a devastating war. As of today, June 18, 2025, the world stands at a critical crossroads. The path forward branches in two very different directions. One leads toward further escalation and a potentially catastrophic regional war, while the other leads toward de-escalation and a return to difficult but essential diplomacy. The choices made in the coming days and weeks by leaders in Jerusalem, Tehran, and Washington will determine which path is taken. The stakes could not be higher, not just for the Middle East, but for the entire global community, which would feel the effects of a wider conflict through economic shocks and new waves of instability. The path of military escalation is a dark and dangerous one. If Israel continues its strikes and Iran continues to retaliate, the cycle of violence will be hard to stop. Each attack will create new grievances and demands for revenge, pushing both sides further down a road to all-out war. A full-scale conflict would lead to thousands of deaths, create millions of refugees, and devastate the economies of both nations. It would also likely draw in other countries, destabilizing the entire region and potentially disrupting up to a third of the world's oil supply, causing a global economic crisis. This is the future that world leaders are desperately trying to avoid. The alternative path is a return to diplomacy, however difficult it may seem right now. This would require both sides to step back from the brink. It would mean an end to the missile attacks and airstrikes, creating a space for international mediators to step in. A sixth round of nuclear talks had been scheduled in Oman before the conflict erupted, and reviving that process is a top priority for many nations. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has said his nation will not surrender, and Israel remains firm on preventing a nuclear Iran. Finding common ground will be incredibly challenging,